All right, let's start with Tua Tagovailoa of the Miami Dolphins. It's a 4-year, $212.4 million extension with $167 million in guarantees. When you start to put the APY or AAV together, just behind Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow, and now eventually later on became lower than Jordan Love's. But Tua gets his deal. He's getting paid by the Dolphins. What are your initial reactions to Tua's big contract?
Yeah, so the funny thing about all three of these guys, I think, is that each one of them, I don't want to use the word red flag because that's too loaded a term, but each one of them has got something to be a little bit scared about, right, if you're the team investing in them. And maybe they have talked themselves out of that. Maybe they've decided they're 100% convinced they're bought in, whatever, that's why they're giving them money. Or maybe they're doing that knowing in the back of their head that there's something there to be scared about. And obviously Tua, you've got the sort of lingering specter of, is he a system quarterback? Like, is he the product of Mike McDaniel's offense and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, all the speed that they've assembled? And is he actually driving any of this? And to a degree, it doesn't matter, right? This is kind of like the Brock Purdy conversation where I always talk about that credit pie chart. And how much of the pie should Tua get versus Tyreek Hill, Mike McDaniel, et cetera. And ultimately, we don't really know. And it doesn't matter as long as they all remain intact. Where it starts to matter is when you give them the contract. Because fundamentally, once they're all in the building, it doesn't matter. But keeping them all in the building becomes more difficult when you have to start assigning a dollar figure to how much each guy gets. So previously, it was easy. Tua wasn't earning that much money. We have money to go around. Tyreek Hill can get a deal, blah, blah, blah. Now, we just gave Tua top-of-the-market quarterback money, so now it becomes harder to give everybody else money and keep them all intact. Tyreek Hill already obviously sort of saying, hey, my contract is no longer top of the receiver market. I would like more money. So it's already becoming more difficult. So that is where I think it starts to get at least important how much of this is the quarterback and how much of it is everything else around him. And that's where I think you start to get into an interesting discussion with Tua.
Tua take here. We'll try to be nuanced here. I think there's something to be said about the system. On the other hand, every time Tua's been hurt, mostly in 2022, not last year, the offense wasn't the same, right? Even with a Teddy Bridgewater, right? Like when Teddy Bridgewater replaced Tua, that felt like, okay, you've got Teddy. He's one of the top 4 or 5 best backups in the league. You still had Tyreek Hill. You still had all that speed. You still had Mike McDaniel. The offense just wasn't the same with Teddy Bridgewater. If there was going to be a time where the drop-off was minimal from starter to backup, it felt like it should have been that situation, and that wasn't the case. Even anecdotally, the 2 days at practice where Tua was doing his little, sit-in or whatever, the reports where the offense wasn't the same. There is something to, I believe Tua has been elevated by good play callers and great speed and big-time playmakers there, and he's also the best fit for this system. I believe both of those things are true. The other piece, too, if you saw the grades that we put up there, I always joke that, hey, player progression is not linear like it's Madden, right? You don't come in as a 65 and then you become a 70 and a 75 and an 80. That's not always the case. However, in Tua's career, we have kind of seen that, right? He's almost kind of ticked boxes as his career has gone on. Last year, I think the big box ticked was he stayed healthy for an entire season, in addition to cleaning up some of the turnover-worthy plays, in addition to getting the ball down the field at a really high rate. Yes, and helped by Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Mike McDaniel. But I think Tua's just gotten progressively better. Now, at the same point, new question marks arose last year. How's he going to do in the playoffs? How's he going to do in the cold weather? How's he going to do when they're not just piling on the Broncos in a Week 3 game in Miami? And some of those questions, every time there was a big game, Tua wasn't as good, right? So those question marks arose. But I think the trajectory is there. And he is a really good fit. My big question would be for all of these contracts, okay, what's the alternative? Are you ready to just, let Tua Tagovailoa walk so that you can get the next guy? No, I don't think, that's a big step to take. We'll talk about that with all the other 2 QBs too. And then the other one is, okay, now, but at the same time, you're paying him all this money. Can you keep that nucleus together? because of these three teams, the Packers, Cowboys, and Dolphins, the Dolphins did the best job of saying, we have rookie contract QB. Let's be aggressive. Let's trade for Jalen Ramsey. Let's trade for Tyreek Hill. Let's pile on these other players. As that gets tighter in the coming years, is Tua the guy to elevate the rest of the roster rather than being a part of this really good roster. So I think there's positives and negatives on both sides of this thing here.
Yeah, I also think Tua is, anytime there's a quarterback where the sort of physical characteristics are obvious from watching his tape, it starts to force a narrative that isn't necessarily there, but it just looks like it is, right? So, Josh Allen being Josh Allen, you start to form. Lamar Jackson's a better example. Lamar Jackson being Lamar Jackson, it starts to force certain opinions, even when there's no evidence to suggest that that's the case. That's why you have certain people sounding off at draft time saying Lamar Jackson should move to wide receiver, right? Utterly ridiculous based off any Lamar Jackson tape you've ever seen in your life, and yet because he is this super freak of an athlete, it starts to become a thing to the point where it gets spouted on like national television, right? The same thing is true with a guy like Tua. Tua is small, does not have a great arm, like he's physically not imposing. So you start to form these ideas of what Tua is as a quarterback, even when there isn't necessarily evidence to back that up. So I agree with you. I think Tua is a bit like Brock Purdy in terms of he's a perfect fit for this offense. And even though the offense is very closely related. Shanahan obviously begat Mike McDaniel. It's the same system, but it's different. It manifests different in each guy. Brock Purdy is perfect for that Shanahan system. We've talked about that before because ad-libbing is like his strength. So when the play sheet runs out of answers, Brock Purdy finds a play in a way some other guys aren't great at. Where Tua is a perfect fit for the McDaniel version is the timing and the anticipation. The stuff that Tua was amazing at coming out of college, it's now so good in that system. Like he's just throwing to spaces, like to these abstract points on a field, knowing that at some point Tyreek Hill is about to fly in behind a linebacker and in front of a safety and arrive just when the ball does. And it leads to him having Tua's interception reel is awful looking because it's like, how did you not see that linebacker, that safety just standing there? And, he did. He's just throwing it to a spot, expecting a guy to arrive there at some point, and if something happens to stop that happening, his interceptions look ridiculous. So it now means he targets the middle of the field incredibly well. He's so good at throwing with that anticipation. But now you start to get people go, but he can't throw outside the numbers. Not with that arm. He can't. He doesn't have the arm to go deep outside the numbers. He doesn't have the Josh Allen throws in his bag. And okay, maybe there are throws that he can't make, but it doesn't show up in terms of statistical production or grade or anything like that when you're looking at just what he does outside the numbers or any kind of sideline metric. I've been looking at his throws last season just either outside the numbers or within 5 yards of the sideline or however you want to chop it up. His grade is amongst the best in the NFL. His stats are amongst the best in the NFL. It's not a problem. Again, maybe you're going to find the odd interception that look ugly, but his production is incredibly good within that offense, no matter what way you slice it. So again, as long as all the variables remain there, it's fine. The question is, does he actually need all those other variables, and have you just undermined your ability to keep all those together by giving him the lion's share of the money?
Yeah, for Tua, I don't think the limitation should be discussed as, he doesn't make this throw or that throw, to your point there, Sam. It's more so, okay, am I trusting him to go win the big game? Because once you get paid this amount of money, now you're talking about week 17 when they play the Ravens and lose by 30, that you got to go head-to-head with MVP Lamar Jackson. You got to go to Kansas City in the playoffs, it's 30 below, and go head-to-head with Patrick Mahomes. You have to go in the division 2 times a year head-to-head with Josh Allen, and there's a difference when it's in Miami in September where it's 100 degrees and in Buffalo in the winter, right? And we saw him do pretty well in the snow in Buffalo in 2022, but there were also a couple big interceptions or turnover-worthy plays during that game as well. So to me, that's the bigger question with Tua. It's nothing specific like this throw, that throw, this type of throw, whatever it might be. It's just, hey, now you're the guy. to go head to head with all of those other quarterbacks, and one of those dudes is in your division. Aaron Rodgers is in your division. The entire AFC is loaded with a big chunk of the better quarterbacks in the league. How are you going to separate yourself? So that's where the standard is. To me, it's about the standard, right? The decision that the Dolphins made, I think they had to make it, right? I think they had to go ahead and do this, right? Because, we joked a couple of years ago, was there ever going to be a team that just drafts a quarterback and lets him, even if he's good, lets him walk after 4 years and brings the next guy in just to have him at pennies on the dollar? And we haven't really seen that strategy yet. Maybe Minnesota has decided to start doing that. We're 4 years away from figuring that out, if that's the case, going with J.J. McCarthy over Kirk Cousins. But what's the alternative for the Dolphins? They had to make this move, and it's not is he worth this or worth that? It's just next contract up. This is the price you pay, and you got to put all your eggs in the Tua basket here.
And we always have this tendency to create narratives. Let's remember what that game in Kansas City was before we're just like writing them off as, Tua's great in September, but once you hit January, February in the frigid cold weather, it's not going to happen. Okay, the offense didn't fire, but that was, number one, historically like an absolute outlier in terms of weather. One of the coldest games in NFL history, just an absolute freak show of a game to be playing in. Number two, remember, at that point, Miami had completely run out of pass rushers, right? Going against the Kansas City Chiefs. So their entire defensive game plan is effectively out the window going up against the best quarterback in the NFL and one of the best offenses in the league. Players that rushed the passer double-digit times for Miami in that game, right? Melvin Ingram, 29 times. They needed Melvin Ingram to rush the passer in that game. Justin Houston, 13 times. Bruce Irvin rushed the passer 11 times.
But they scored 7 points. I mean, that's why they lost. But
they
scored 7 points, and they had one deep ball.
Right, but my point being, if that had been like a 7-9 encounter, which is the way that game probably would have gone in a normal encounter, we wouldn't be saying, Miami can't play in the cold weather. It's just like this could have been a game with like minus a million temperature where nobody was going to score points. But Miami couldn't defend because they didn't have any edge rushers anymore. So not only do they have geriatrics rushing the passer, but they had to blitz, which you don't do against Patrick Mahomes. So linebacker David Long blitzed 10 times because they don't have any edge rushers. Safety Brandon Jones blitzed 8 times because they didn't have any edge rushers. So now Patrick Mahomes is able to beat the blitz, pass his way to success, and suddenly Kansas City's able to execute their offense. You're like, Miami's didn't show up, Kansas City's did. This is a failing of Tua. It's not necessarily. Like, the defense having no edge rushers has a knock-on effect to all of this.
I guess. I mean, the bigger thing, again, you're trying to say, let's not create narratives that aren't there. And it might not be the cold weather. That's the narrative. For me, though, it's the same story as Dak and the Cowboys last year. It's the good game. It's the good teams, right? We saw Miami put up more yards than any other team in history over the first 5 weeks of the season. The famous line from Mike McDaniel, hey, mission accomplished, joking around. They were front runners last year. They were the team that when things were going good and they're playing, the Commanders and they're playing the Giants, they're playing these bad teams, they could rattle off stats and points and rack it up, right? But when you're going head to head with the best in the league, there's still a question about Tua, right? There's still a question, whether it's in Kansas City or in Miami, but more so road games generally, they were not the same team. And in those road games last year happened to coincide with playing the better teams, right? Going to Baltimore, they go to Buffalo every year. They went to Kansas City in the playoffs. They played Kansas City in on a neutral field last year. So look, those are true concerns. Those are real things. But also, I think you could be encouraged by Tua's trajectory heading into year 5 in his career. He's gotten better every single year. He stayed healthy last year. He's growing in the system. We used to look at this, if we're not just looking at Super Bowls and this extremely high standard, we used to look at this and say, yeah, this guy's progressing. He's getting better. There's something there to build upon. That is all true with Tua Tagovailoa. But the question also remains, is it enough to go beat, these other, because where does he rank among quarterbacks in the AFC? 6th or 7th? I mean, it's it's not in the top 3 because it's so loaded. So that's going to be the question here for the Dolphins and Tua moving forward.
Yeah, but to me, I think the question is more like it's going to be phrased as a Tua question. I actually think the question is more just the overall offense. Like, it's so good. You know, it was incredible through the first 5 weeks. It's been incredibly fast out of the gate in each of the Mike McDaniel seasons. It gets caught up to or found out late in the season, or has for 2 straight years. It's like, it's not a, like Tua was still as good in the second half of the year as he was in the first half of the year, but the offense wasn't. So to me, the question is broader than Tua. It's more Miami's offense, the schematic advantage that they're able to generate in the offseason. Are they able to sustain that all the way through the year? Because in so far, it's been caught up to late in each season, the last 2 seasons. And Tua, as the quarterback, the poster child, like, he'll take the brunt of the criticism for that. And that may be fine. That's just the dynamic of the way the position works. But it might be missing the source of what's actually starting to cause them problems.
It's a fair point. Our friend JT O'Sullivan was on the show early in the year, somewhat early in the year last year, and he used the old school cliche, will this offense travel? Right. I usually hate that cliche. Hate it, Sam. But I think it was actually a fair point and maybe foretold, the Dolphins' inconsistency last year. So